my name is Rachel, and until 8 months ago, I was the woman who apologized for taking up too much space. I'm 31 years old. I'm a certified public accountant. I have a master's degree in forensic accounting from the University of Texas at Austin, a professional license I have protected with every decision I have ever made, and a reputation among my colleagues for being meticulous, methodical, and almost annoyingly thorough. I say almost annoyingly because that's what my supervisor called me during my last performance review, and he meant it as the highest possible compliment. None of that mattered to my husband's family. To them, I was simply the woman who had married into the Hargrove name, and the Hargrove name, according to my mother-in-law, was something you spent a lifetime earning the right to carry. I had been carrying it for 6 years. Apparently 6 years was not long enough. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened at that birthday party in Scottsdale. I need you to understand the kind of household I had married into, because without that context, the events of that Saturday night in March will seem like an isolated incident. They were not an isolated incident. They were the inevitable conclusion of 6 years of smaller moments I had dismissed, minimized, or quietly absorbed. My husband Daniel was the second of 3 sons in a family that had built a regional construction company over 30 years. His father, my father-in-law, had started Hargrove Building Group out of a single truck and a handshake reputation in Phoenix, Arizona, and had grown it into a company with 47 employees and contracts across 3 counties. It was a genuine success story, and he told it often. He told it at Thanksgiving. He told it at Easter. He told it at the school fundraiser for his youngest grandchild. He told it to the waiter who had not asked. My mother-in-law was the family's organizational center and its emotional enforcer. She was the kind of woman who communicated love through criticism and called it honesty. She had opinions about how I loaded the dishwasher, how I styled my hair, why we had not yet had children, and whether my career was, in her words, really necessary at this point. She never asked these things with cruelty in her voice. She asked them with the patient, slightly disappointed tone of a woman who had expected more and was choosing to remain hopeful. Daniel's older brother, Marcus, ran the financial side of Hargrove Building Group. He had the title of Chief Financial Officer, though his undergraduate degree was in communications, and he had never sat for a single accounting certification. He was charming and loud and took up every room he entered. His wife, Stephanie, laughed at everything he said and repeated his opinions back to him as though they were her own. Daniel was the one I had fallen in love with. He was quieter than Marcus, more thoughtful, genuinely kind in the private moments of our early years together. But families have gravity, and over 6 years, I had watched the gravity of the Hargrove household slowly pull him back toward its center. By the time March arrived, I sometimes looked at my husband across the dinner table and struggled to find the man I had married underneath the performance he put on for his family. I had been doing the books for Hargrove Building Group for 3 years. That part is important. When I first offered, it had seemed natural. I was a CPA. The company needed reliable accounting oversight. My father-in-law had been using an outside firm that charged significant fees for work that, frankly, I could see was not particularly sophisticated. I offered to take over the function as a contribution to the family business. My mother-in-law had smiled and said it was so thoughtful. My father-in-law had shaken my hand like we had struck a deal. What I did not anticipate was what I would eventually find inside those books. I want to be precise about the timeline, because precision matters when you are describing financial irregularities to federal investigators. I first noticed something unusual in the vendor payment records 14 months before the birthday party. It was a small thing, a recurring payment to a subcontractor called Southwest Material Supply LLC that did not match any of the material delivery records I could cross-reference. The amount was not enormous. $4,000 monthly for 11 months. I noted it, I set it aside. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation and that I would ask Marcus about it when the timing felt right. The timing never felt right, because every time I was in a room with Marcus and tried to shift the conversation toward the books, he redirected with the particular skill of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of being busy. He was always just leaving for a meeting. He was always just getting off a call. He was always deeply engaged in a conversation with someone else the moment I approached, so I kept looking on my own, Southwest Materials Supply LLC did not have a physical address that corresponded to any registered business location I could verify. Its state registration listed Marcus's personal attorney as the registered agent. Over the following 8 months, I traced $430,000 in payments to that entity, all of them recorded in the company's books as legitimate subcontractor expenses. None of them were. I could not find a single invoice, a single delivery confirmation, a single project record that justified $1 of those payments. I also found a second entity, and a third. By the time February arrived, I had documented over $900,000 in payments I could not reconcile against any legitimate business purpose. I had built a file so detailed, so carefully sourced, and so methodically organized that when I eventually handed it to the investigators, one of them told me it was the cleanest forensic accounting package he had seen outside of a professional litigation support firm. I had not yet told Daniel what I found. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was fear. Not physical fear. Not yet, but the particular fear of a woman who has spent years in a family that punishes disruption. Part of it was the professional instinct to be certain before I said anything out loud. But part of it, and I think I owe you the honesty of admitting this, part of it was that I already suspected what Daniel's reaction would be, and I was not yet ready to face it. I was still hoping I was wrong about him. My father-in-law turned 65 in March. My mother-in-law had been planning the celebration for 4 months. It was held at a private event space in North Scottsdale, the kind of place with exposed beam ceilings and Edison bulb lighting and a catering menu that cost more per person than most people spend on groceries in a week. There were 53 guests. I counted them later because counting things is how I process situations when my emotions are threatening to overwhelm my reason. I wore a green dress. I remember the dress specifically because Stephanie commented on it when I arrived, in that particular tone she used when she wanted to say something unkind while maintaining deniability. "That color is very bold for you," she said and smiled. The evening began in the way these evenings always began, with my father-in-law holding court near the bar, retelling the origin story of Hargrove Building Group to a rotating audience of guests who had all heard it before and were performing surprise and admiration with varying degrees of success. My mother-in-law moved through the room with the focused energy of a woman managing an event she had already mentally critiqued 17 times. I had decided by that point that I was going to give my notice. I had made an appointment with an attorney for the following Monday. I had begun the process of formally documenting my withdrawal from the accounting role so that my professional liability was clearly bounded. I had not yet decided what I was going to do with the file. I had not yet decided whether I would tell Daniel before or after I spoke to the attorney. What I had not decided was how to answer the question my mother-in-law asked me in front of 11 people near the appetizer table. Approximately 40 minutes into the evening, she asked me with that patient and slightly disappointed smile whether I had finished the quarterly reports for the company. She asked it casually, conversationally, as though she were asking whether I had picked up dry cleaning. But there were 11 people standing within earshot, and Marcus was one of them, and the way Marcus went still when she asked the question told me everything I needed to know about whether this was actually a casual question. I said I was still working through some discrepancies. The stillness in Marcus deepened. My mother-in-law tilted her head and asked what kind of discrepancies. I said, carefully, that there were some vendor payment records I had not been able to fully reconcile, and that I wanted to make sure everything was accurate before I submitted anything. Marcus set down his drink. He said, in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled, that he wasn't sure what I thought I was looking for, but that the vendor relationships were his area of responsibility, and he would appreciate it if I would discuss any questions with him directly rather than bringing them up at a family celebration. I said I agreed completely and that I had tried to find a time to discuss them with him for several months. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. I know because I counted. Then my father-in-law's voice came from behind me. He asked me to explain myself. I turned around. He was standing closer than I had realized, and the expression on his face was not the jovial patriarch expression he wore for the origin story. It was something else entirely. I still remembered the casual shrug. As she handed me 200 a casual shrug. As he handed me 200 a casual shrug. And that I believed it was important for the company's financial integrity to resolve them properly. My father-in-law told me that I had been trusted with access to private family business information and that what I was doing right now, at his birthday celebration in front of his guests, was a betrayal of that trust. I still remember the casual shrug. As she handed me $200 and his children. That moment at dinner was stating of her endeavors shattered and his children. I turned and looked at him, and I saw him look at me, and then I saw him look at his father, and I saw the decision happen in real time on his face. He told me I needed to stop. I said his name. He said it again. Stop. Then my mother-in-law said, in a voice pitched perfectly for the surrounding audience, that she had always known I resented this family for never fully accepting me, and that apparently I had decided to use my access to the company to manufacture some kind of grievance. I told her that was not what was happening. She said she thought it was very sad, actually. She said she had tried for 6 years, and then Marcus, who had been watching all of this with the expression of a man calculating odds, said that he thought it might be time for me to leave. 53 people were in that room. I want you to hold that number. Daniel looked at me and said nothing. I picked up my bag from the chair where I had left it. I walked toward the exit. I was almost at the door when my father-in-law's voice crossed the entire room. He told me that if I was planning to do what he thought I was planning to do, I should think very carefully about what I would be destroying. He said I would lose everything. He said I had nothing without this family. I stopped walking. I turned around. I looked at him across that room of 53 people with my husband standing next to his father, and I said, in a voice that was steady in a way I still don't entirely understand, I have my license, I have my files, and I have an appointment on Monday. Then I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard. I was not crying. I was not shaking, exactly, though my hands were unsteady in a way that made me grip the steering wheel harder than necessary. I was doing what I always do when a situation threatens to overwhelm my capacity to think clearly. I was making a list. The list had 3 items on it. The first call I made was to my attorney. Not the appointment I had scheduled for Monday, her emergency line. She had given it to me 6 weeks earlier when I first described what I had found in the accounts, because she had understood immediately, even before I finished explaining, that this situation had the potential to move faster than a Monday appointment could accommodate. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what had happened at the party. She told me to come to her office first thing in the morning and to bring the file. The second call I made was to my sister, who lived in Tucson and who had, for 6 years, listened to me explain why the Hargroves were complicated but fundamentally good people. I told her I needed a place to stay. She said she would leave the key under the mat, and there would be food in the refrigerator. The third call I made was to the IRS Criminal Investigation Tip Line. I want to be clear about something. I did not make that third call out of anger. I made it because I was a licensed CPA who had documented evidence of what appeared to be substantial tax fraud and the systematic falsification of business records. And I had a professional and legal obligation that did not pause because I was sitting in a parking lot in Scottsdale trying to hold myself together. I made it because $900,000 does not belong to the people who took it. I made it because silence, in that situation, was not neutrality. It was complicity. I drove to Tucson that night. I did not take much. I took my files, 2 years of documentation, organized by entity, cross-referenced by date, with every source material preserved. I took my laptop and my external hard drive. I took my professional certifications off the wall of my home office. I took the ring off my finger and left it on the kitchen counter because I had made a decision in that parking lot, and I had learned over 31 years that decisions only mean something if you follow them all the way through. I left a note. It said, I found the accounts. I documented everything. I have an obligation I am going to fulfill. I'm sorry it came to this. I've thought about that note many times since then. I don't know if sorry was the right word. I was not sorry for what I had found. I was not sorry for what I was going to do with it. I think I was sorry that I had spent 6 years hoping a family could be different than it actually was. My attorney met with me for 4 hours on Sunday morning. She reviewed the file and was quiet for a long time afterward. Then she said, Rachel, this is remarkably thorough. She said it the way my supervisor had called me, almost annoyingly meticulous. Like thoroughness in this context was something close to grace. She walked me through what would happen next and what I needed to prepare for. She was direct about the fact that the coming months would be difficult. She told me Daniel's family would likely attempt to discredit me, to characterize my documentation as fabricated or motivated by a personal grievance. She said that the strength of my position came entirely from the quality of my records and from my professional standing, both of which were, in her assessment, very strong. She also told me something I have thought about many times since then. She said that people who do what Marcus did often do it in plain sight of family members who have quietly decided not to see it. She said that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply to see clearly. The investigation moved more quickly than I had expected. I won't detail the legal process in ways that could affect anything still ongoing, but I can tell you that by May, Marcus had been placed on administrative leave from the company, pending the outcome of a federal investigation. By June, 2 of the 3 shell entities had been formally identified and their records subpoenaed. The family retained 4 separate attorneys. My father-in-law gave an interview to a local business publication in which he described the situation as a painful family matter being exploited by outside parties, which I found interesting given that I had been inside that family for 6 years and he had told me, in front of 53 people, that I had nothing without them. Daniel filed for divorce in April. I did not contest it. The proceedings were what my attorney described as uncomplicated, which I think was her way of saying they were painful but not prolonged. I moved into an apartment in Austin in July. I found a position at a firm I had admired for years, one that specifically focuses on forensic accounting support for federal investigations. When I disclosed the circumstances of my departure from my previous role during the interview, the partner who was hiring me was quiet for a moment and then said, "So you found something, documented it correctly, and reported it through the proper channels at significant personal cost?" I said yes. She said, "That's exactly what a CPA is supposed to do." I want to tell you about the morning I drove away from the house I had shared with Daniel for 5 years. I had a single car full of things. I had my professional files, my certifications, 2 boxes of books, and a plant I had kept alive for 4 years that I refused to leave behind because I felt it had earned the right to come with me. The house looked very still in the early morning light. I had spent 5 years inside it believing it was the place where my life was taking shape. I understand now that it was, just not in the way I had thought. The cost of what happened was real. I want to say that plainly, because I think there is a version of this kind of story that implies the person who does the right thing emerges from it clean and undamaged. And that has not been my experience. I lost a marriage I had invested myself in fully. I lost the version of the future I had been building. I spent months second-guessing the timing of my decisions, wondering whether there were choices I could have made differently that would have changed the outcome. Not the legal outcome, but the human one. What I did not lose was my license. I did not lose my professional standing. I did not lose the clarity I found in that parking lot in Scottsdale when I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and made 3 phone calls. I also did not lose myself, which I think was the more important thing, because I had come very close to doing that long before the birthday party. I had come close to doing it in all the small moments over 6 years when I had made myself smaller to fit a space that had never actually been designed for me. My sister asked me once, during the months when everything was still uncertain, whether I regretted going to that birthday party. Whether I thought things might have gone differently if I had just stayed home, avoided the conversation, bought myself more time. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I told her that I had not gone to that party to start something. I had gone because I was still trying to belong somewhere I had already been told in 100 quiet ways that I did not belong, and that maybe the most useful thing that happened in that room was that the choice was taken out of my hands in a way I could not minimize or rationalize or absorb into another year of silence. They told me I had nothing without them. I had my files. I had my license. I had the number of a federal tip line and the professional obligation to use it. It turned out that was enough. It turned out it was more than enough. There is something I have started saying to myself in the mornings, in the apartment in Austin, before I open my laptop and begin the work I chose for myself and no one else. I have started saying, You did not burn what you left. You just finally stopped trying to build a home inside a house that was never going to be yours. Some costs are real, and some costs are the price of learning the difference between a place you are tolerated and a place you are free. I paid that price in full, and I would pay it again.